Tonight, the subject is education. We're going to talk about some common sense and smart thinking that's being applied to the education system, our kids, and our schools. I promise we're going to keep you engaged. It's something you need to know is going on in the world of education. And joining us from the great state of Texas is that state's Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath. He's had that job since 2017. Commissioner, welcome to Huckabee today. We're delighted to have you here to talk about the innovations going on in Texas. You have done some significant changes in K through 12 curriculum, making the textbooks are really now targeted for classrooms in your state, and you're calling it the Blue Bonnet Program.
We are blessed in Texas and in so many other parts of the country to have an army of angels working in schools all over the country. People who sign up to be teachers who want to help mold eager young minds. But what we discovered during the pandemic is we often did not give them rigorous instructional materials that would look, say, like the lessons that you and I had when we were kids. And so the state legislature passed a law asking us, the Texas Education Agency, to build rigorous instructional materials. Think textbooks, lesson plans, sometimes even the posters on the wall, these kinds of things that could be made available as an option for classroom teachers so that they could focus really on the fundamentals, what our kids need most in elementary reading, elementary mathematics, and in fact, math all the way going up to algebra to ensure that all of our kids can read, write, and do math and do it very well.
What a novel idea that the students who go to school would actually learn the things that really are foundational to living life. Commissioner, I know that Texas is one of the largest school book purchasers in the country, maybe the largest, because you buy it for the state. What Texas does pretty much influences all 50 states. So the fact that you're doing it in Texas, I want to make sure our audience understands this is not just about Texas. This really will have a dramatic impact across the country because other states will end up following the textbook example of Texas.
This investment that the state has built, so Bluebonnet Learning, as you mentioned before, this is the name of the Texas textbooks that have been developed, really do focus on the fundamentals. So think in kindergarten, this is where students need to develop their basic understanding of the alphabet, the sounds that letters make, the penmanship, so the handwriting that students developed to shape the letters, both in print and in cursive, their beginnings of the understanding of the rules of spelling and grammar of the English language. This is what is absolutely critical in kindergarten. And as that advances in the first grade and second grade, you want that to build one level of education on the next. And so by the end of second grade, as students follow the Bluebonnet Learning sequence, they can write well in print and in cursive. They can write a sentence that's grammatically correct, understanding the rules of punctuation and spelling and capitalization, and they can begin to write, by the time they're in third grade, they can begin to write paragraphs. But it's not just about teaching the basic rules of grammar. Understanding how to read and understanding how to write are also a function of all the words you know. What are you learning about? So in kindergarten, we focus on the fundamentals. This starts with things like nursery rhymes, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, but it's stories of the origin of America. So colonial and Native Americans and the first Thanksgiving. This is one of the key lessons, reading lessons, that is reinforced in kindergarten. Towards the end of kindergarten, there's a unit, it's called America, Our Great Country. And kids learn hymns like America the Beautiful, but they will also learn about some of the major presidents in our history. So this is Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson and Teddy Roosevelt. They'll actually learn about the origins of Mount Rushmore, which are those four presidents, of course. In second grade, they learn about the origins of democracy in ancient Athens. They'll learn about the civilization of the ancient Greeks and listen to engaging stories of the ancient Greeks while they grow their vocabulary. And then they write a lot, as you would want to see in second grade. They're writing sentences and sentence stems. as the kids advance, the topics continue to grow their knowledge of the world. They'll read The Wind in the Willows, the great classic, in third grade. They'll learn about ancient Rome. They'll read Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. They'll read the great C.S. Lewis classic, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So it's a very a foundationally focused set of instructional materials to make sure that our kids understand language and then also understand our heritage as Americans.
The Texas State Board of Education took a key vote on adopting a new statewide curriculum that would incorporate biblical teachings into the state's public schools.
Texas school board officials approved these new course materials. Called Bluebonnet Learning, parts of these materials include religious lessons that critics say undermine religious freedom and could isolate non-Christian students. Lesson plans as early as kindergarten highlight Christian religious teachings like Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. This new curriculum in Texas follows Republican-led efforts in other neighboring states to similarly give Christianity a stronger presence in public schools. Jaden Edison, he's the education reporter for the Texas Tribune. Help us understand what the rationale is. For the proponents of this, why do they argue that infusing education with more Christian teachings is helpful in a multicultural, multi-religious state and nation?
Right. Well, I think you've seen a lot of, arguments that, students need to learn, more about the nation's founding, right? And they frame it around this argument that obviously, the Bible played an integral role in the founding of the country, right? So I think that's one part of it, but obviously it's important to understand the kind of political dynamics, right? Where you've had state officials who've criticized how school districts teach about, America's history of racism and gender and its diversity. And so in many ways too, you look at the larger kind of ideological conversation being had, there are many people who believe this is also an attempt to kind of infuse more Christianity in the schools.
How does this fit into this larger trend? Texas is not alone in this. We've seen several efforts in other states to inject Christianity more overtly into public schools. How does this fit into that larger trend going on?
There's almost a national kind of playbook right now. I mean, we've heard, Louisiana's governor say, I can't wait to be sued as it relates to, laws that would obviously implement the 10 Commandments on posters in classrooms. That's something obviously that's been considered here in Texas. But I think, part of what legal scholars have warned is that given that, you have a Supreme Court of the United States that has been more friendly to some of these arguments about, religion and have kind of eroded decades of precedent, things like implementing this curriculum obviously can prove to be testing grounds, on, where the Establishment Clause stands, right? Where the separation of church and state precedent, where that goes from here.
Bible teachings in classrooms across the state. We've received a lot of questions from you about the lesson plan. KPRC2's Bill Barajas live in our newsroom with what he found out about the new material and how it would be taught. Bill.
Now, I want to point out this new curriculum would be optional for each and every district, but the state would offer a $40 incentive per student to districts who choose to adopt the lessons and an extra $20 to cover the cost of textbooks. Keep in mind, the lessons would be for students in kindergarten through 5th grade.
We went page by page. This is the teacher's guide to the new curriculum. We also took a hard look at some of your questions. This one in particular. What or how is the legislative committee planning to do to add this content? We found a few examples. This here is a kindergarten English teacher guide. Lesson 1 focuses on helping our neighbors. It shares background information for teachers on how there are references of the golden rule in the Torah, Bible, and mentions in Islam and Hinduism. Then, as the lesson plan deepens, it shares further details of stories from the Bible. We also found this one. A 1st grade unit on sharing stories would teach the parable of the prodigal son. In the section labeled Background for Teacher, it explains the text for that lesson is a story derived from the book of Luke, a book of the New Testament of the Christian Bible. It's those type of lessons that has divided people and groups.
Critics like the Texas Freedom Network says the Bible-based curriculum lacks transparency and could alienate non-Christian students.
Something that's important to note is the way that they are phrasing a lot of this literature. They are stating things as historical fact instead of making a statement that some Christians believe this, and that is hugely problematic because if you were to see the report that we filed with Dr. David Brockman, which is a religious scholar and Christian theologian, him and a number of scholars point out that these lessons suggest that Christian faith claims are true, and public schools, which have students from a wide variety of faith backgrounds, can't do this. And we encourage folks to read the review by Dr. David Brockman and understand that these lessons, the way that they are framed, are not age appropriate, and they don't belong in our public schools if they can't do it in a balanced way that talks about all religions and not favoring one above the others.
The curriculum that you're talking about is the Bluebonnet curriculum, right? So that has to be modified in some way of maybe some things can stay and other things need to be replaced.
Right. For example, a big proponent of it that is problematic that we had some Republicans vote with us was that it's not age appropriate. If you are talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ as historically accurate, students are going to believe that one resurrection is real, and they're not preparing teachers to be able to have that conversation as questions come up. And so that is hugely problematic at that young age. This is for K through 5th grade. If a kindergartner is asking questions about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, or they are being questioned in some of these lessons about what did God create on the first day, that is indoctrination, and that is not a place for our public schools, and certainly not age appropriate in many of these lessons. One thing that I think is really important to note is that we know that this is a push of a wider national agenda to push Christian nationalism. Texas is often the place where they vet a lot of these things. We've been seeing a lot of bills being filed in the legislature. Yesterday, we saw the 10 Commandments bill get filed again. And so we anticipate more bills filed in the legislature that will dictate what students are learning in school. And this is a part of that.
Here's my study Bible. These lessons would be totally appropriate in a Sunday school. I love the Bible. I think that the Bible should be read and studied, but it's not the job of public schools to be indoctrinating young children through the teaching of Bible stories when they should be teaching reading and language arts. Here, I'll pull up one of the objectionable lessons. What does it mean here when the text said that Mary had found favor with God? It means that she was supported or liked by God. 10, Christianity in the Roman Empire. Texas public schools are not Christian Sunday schools. It's compulsory to go to school. Kids of all faiths and none attend Texas public schools. And so it infringes on religious freedom to teach these Bible stories in ways that will be devotional because of the age of the children and also because of the way that they're not really relevant to the subject matter that is being taught. Every school district in Texas will have this curriculum as one option among many as they are choosing which materials they are going to use in their public schools. And so it will then be up to those Texans like me who are concerned about this curriculum to make our views known to those school boards across the state of Texas.
Joining us now is Amanda Tyler, Executive Director of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. Amanda, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us. First off, I'd just like to get your reaction to this decision to allow Bible lessons in Texas schools.
Well, I'm very disappointed by the board's 8-7 vote to approve this flawed curriculum that thousands of Texans voiced their disapproval of to the Texas State Board of Education. We had profound disagreements with the curriculum, the way that it incorporated teaching of Bible stories to kids as young as kindergarten in their reading and language arts classes, because of the ways that it will interfere with the religious freedom rights of kids and their families if it is implemented. The curriculum does not automatically get implemented in Texas schools, but rather the fight will now shift to school districts across the state of Texas. And it is my hope and expectation that Texans across the state will voice their concerns about religious freedom with this particular curriculum.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I wanted to ask you. This is sort of at the core of really any opposition to something of this kind. What kind of message do you think this sends to families who are not of Christian faith, for starters?
Well, I hope that they'll see that there are so many Christians like me. I'm a Baptist, and I have profound concerns about teaching the Bible in public schools. So I hope that they will see that they are not alone, that in order for us to protect everyone's religious freedom rights in this country, that we need to protect the institutional separation of church and state, that our public schools are strong because everyone is welcome in our public schools, regardless of which religion they practice, and that all can equally learn and equally belong in Texas public schools. I am concerned that if this curriculum were to be implemented in certain school districts, that message of belonging would be at issue, that kids who are not Christian would feel that they were not equally a part of our public schools, and that harms their religious freedom. But for Christians like me, it also harms our religious freedom, because it should be up to Texas families and their houses of worship to provide religious instruction. That is a foundational constitutional premise and promise for our country, that we protect religious freedom by keeping government out of affairs of religious instruction. And this curriculum, if it were to be implemented, would attack that foundational constitutional promise.
As a Christian, you testified before Congress last year, and you said to oppose Christian nationalism is not to oppose Christianity. I want you to explain a little bit more about what you meant.
That's right. Christian nationalism is this political ideology and cultural framework that tries to merge Christian and American identities. It says to be a real Christian, one has to be an American, and to be a real American, one has to be a Christian. That idea of Christian nationalism is both an attack on our constitutional promises of religious freedom, but it also is at odds with my understanding of Christianity, a Christian faith in which God loves everyone, regardless of national identity. Christian nationalism seeks to merge political and religious authority in ways that can lead to idolatry, in ways that turn the gospel of love into a false idol of power. And so for all of these reasons, it is because of my Christian faith, not in spite of it, that I am called to speak out against Christian nationalism, and I am not alone.
Amanda Tyler, thank you so much for taking the time. Such an important perspective you have on the subject.
To your point about religion being taught as a kind of academic topic where you look at various religions, I think that's broadly fine. I do notice that a religious scholar who by the name of David Brockman, I think, spoke to a number of news outlets about this, and his objection, he believes that religion should be taught in the way that you're talking about, as a philosophy and as something that matters to people's lives. His objection was that the curriculum here verges on Christian proselytism. And he was referring to the whitewashing of various elements of Christian history. For example, in the teaching of the debates around slavery, abolitionists are rightly credited with the fact that their Christian faith played some role in many of them reaching that position, and the fact that slavers, or people who were pro-slavery, also cited the Bible is kind of generally ignored. One other thing that I find just interesting with this debate generally is the argument. I'm not a religious person, but there are arguments being made in this debate by people who are religious, who do not want the state to be teaching their children about religion because they believe that right belongs to them. There was a Jewish grandmother by the name of Barbara Baruch from the San Antonio area who said that she believes her grandkids should share our family's religion. Her family's religion is Judaism. And she says, I need help to stop the government from teaching them to be Christians.
David Brockman, a scholar in religion and public policy from Rice University's Baker Institute.
it's hard to know exactly what the Supreme Court and the lower courts will think about this curriculum, but I do think that there is still a strong legal case against it, in that it does, in my view, vastly overemphasize Christianity at the expense of other religions, and that does seem to be promoting Christianity in ways that may not be constitutional. There is a whole lot of Bible in this curriculum, and very little discussion of other religions. There are some mentions of Islam and Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and so on, but they are vastly outweighed by the Christian and biblical content.
A lesson plan featuring the Bible. We're talking about the Blue Bonnet curriculum. Several of its lessons incorporate well-known Bible studies like the story of the prodigal son and the Good Samaritan. Some lessons on classical art note, how stories from Genesis were used by painters. And there's a study section on poetry mentioning the Book of Psalms. The curriculum is not a mandate. It's up to local school districts to use it, and it will be available by August.
Well, we live in a democracy, not a theocracy, and this country was established for people to exercise their religious freedom. Teaching a curriculum that focuses on Christianity and mentions the other religions as an afterthought is not my example of freedom. I think as an option for a club, perhaps, or as an elective, people should have the option to study the Bible or pray or whatever, but to make it like a mandate, I think is highly unacceptable. It ignores the Jewish students, the Muslim students, and even the atheists and the other Hindi students, etc.
Well, one, I think it is optional, right? Each school district is going to be able to use it to their advantage or not, because it also comes with an incentive. It comes with a $40 incentive per student. So sometimes you have to follow the money. A lot of school districts are going to take it because they feel like they need the money, right? And it's an option, of course. You don't have to take it.
But when the school district decides, what do the students do who may have different beliefs and they don't want to participate in that? So what do you do with those kids? Do they get a 0 or an F or a U in that class?
I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis, right? But I don't think any teacher in Texas is going to hold a student accountable for something that is optional, right? I'm not going to fail you because you don't want to believe what I believe.
So this is not a separate religious class. These are Bible stories that will be interwoven throughout the reading language arts curriculum. So if the district opts in, a teacher can't give students options. If the district adopts it, you have to teach it, okay? And so that is why I'm against it. I don't think that it's fair for the school. They're going to school, not Sunday school, but to learn academics. And I think the real issue is that some of our schools are out of control with discipline. We get it. We want to have a moral, compass, and we want them to have a chance to center themselves and meditate. Why not let students take 20 minutes to go read the Quran or read the Torah or do whatever, take yoga? Why force them to take it in a classroom setting while ignoring, not giving equal exposure to all religions? That's just not. And the other thing is this. No matter what book you put in front of a child, there's such a thing called theory versus practice. We're reading the Bible in theory, but the God is in us when we're going to these school buildings. So the leadership, whether you're leading a school, university, city, state, or the nation, if your behavior and comportment does not align with the teachings in the Bible, our students are going to notice that, and we're going to send them mixed messages. And trust me, I'm Christian, my father was Muslim, I love all religions, I love all good people. But in terms of teaching it in school, it's really about the expectations and the behavior. Like, it makes no difference if a teacher teaches you a biblical story, and then when someone's bullying you, she's ignoring you. We have to walk the talk. So what I'm saying is that although it's a good idea for clubs and as options, we still have to put that step into practice, the bullying, the name calling, all the things we see from the national stage, right? The person in the highest position in this country is not leading by example.
I think most people, the reason it's going to pass is because people agree with the 10 Commandments. People agree with thou shalt not kill, right? Thou shalt honor thy mother and thy father, right? That's why it's going to pass, because most people agree with it.
And really quick, Victor, devil's advocate here, is it's all about conservative politics.
I think that's part of the problem. I think you're making it politicized on either way, right? I think it should be a choice that you shouldn't be forced, no one should be force-fed religion. But in that same token, it is interwoven into our government already.
Some parents are not comfortable with other people teaching their children religion. That's why they go to church on Sunday. They have a youth pastor, they have a main pastor. They don't want the teacher doing that. Then interpretation. Ultimately, a school culture needs to have a set of core values that are going to align with the Quran and the Torah too. They teach about goodness as well. Why not have a core set of values that align with all those books and teach by practice, by modeling how to treat human beings? That's what our schools are needing. We need a culture shift. A culture shift from the teachers, the bullying, all those things they're running rampant. And again, after November 5th, we sent a very clear message. We have double standards. We do not walk the talk. We have theory. But in practice, you turn on the news, you see your presidential candidate simulating fellatio and hand jobs. But you're trying to tell that same party saying, go read a Bible.
All right. Out of time, but we get your point. We get it. We get it.
There are more than 1,200 school districts. In Texas, Zeph Capo, who is president of the Texas chapter of the American Federation of Teachers, says the curriculum currently may not be age appropriate or even correct.
Curriculum that is often hastily put together, not factually correct. We now have one governmental entity, one group of people that are in power that are putting their thumb on the scale in the adoption of this curriculum to the detriment of many others in our society that may feel that their own beliefs are being encroached upon. It seems to be primarily Christian-based curriculum that leans far too heavy on a religious story or religious base to the point that it is framing a narrative and moving those that utilize the curriculum and those that learn from it into a particular religious channel, as opposed to what really should be the place of government is to be neutral on such issues. You know, young students are very impressionable. We've had the same government, many of the same players behind it in the state of Texas actually making accusations against our educators that we're indoctrinating students, when in fact, as this curriculum comes to development and is implemented in school districts, particularly because they are focusing on kids so young and so impressionable, that we will in fact have a state government that's indoctrinating students.
So we think that it's important to teach about the Bible, but when you teach the Bible, you're crossing a line in Texas public schools. And so it has been our position that while it is important to teach that the Bible exists and different faith exists, and Christianity is of course a major faith around the world, there are many people in the world who do not believe that particular faith. And if they do, they may not believe in the version that is being taught in these materials. So we certainly value the religious teachings, and we think that those should be between a parent or a faith leader and the student. And so when it comes to having teachers and educators teaching these things in a public school, students don't know enough to push back. And of course, they're taught to trust their teachers and to believe their teachers, and that their teachers are in a position of authority.
We're really disappointed that they're doing this, because they had the opportunity to provide a balanced curriculum that addresses different religions that are represented across the state of Texas. They failed to do that, and they had that opportunity. Instead, these Bluebonnet materials go far beyond that important goal of promoting religious literacy. They instead still veer into straight up Bible study, indoctrination, and bad history. And, you know, another important fact that I think is important to mention is the lack of transparency in a lot of this for parents in the development of these materials. TEA has refused to make public who wrote these lessons and what their qualifications were. and it won't release recommendations and guidance from the OER advisory board that was appointed by the Education Commissioner Mike Morath. They are incentivizing school districts to adopt this by baiting them with more funding when our public schools in Texas are already drastically underfunded. The second point I want to make about the individual school districts voting on this is that you're going to have a different education in different parts of Texas. If some school districts adopt this and others don't, you will have some school districts that have more discrimination and bullying based off of a student and their family's religious background. And that is not something that we think belongs in public schools and in Texas.
One of the reasons why the TEA was considering this is to raise up reading comprehension scores. Do you think that is a good reason or something that people should consider?
You can do that in a balanced way is the main point that we want to make, right? We have no problem with religion being taught in schools if it is done in a balanced way that takes into account all religions and people that don't practice a religion. If we wanted to increase our reading scores, we would fund our public schools. We would provide teachers with real resources to be able to provide a quality education to our students across Texas. And we don't see that happening. But one of the things that I want to point out is that advisory board that we mentioned, you have people, that political operatives that are stacked on that board, like Ben Carson, that have no right to be on that board, that don't understand how to actually write curriculum and are filled with bias that is clearly shown in the report that we have. But they simply don't understand this curriculum and have no business dictating what students are going to be learning in public schools.